My name is Elma Hogeboom. I'm a current PhD student at the School of Traditional Arts in London. My research is about paradise, something I associated with an exotic place far away, or something far away in terms of time, something from like the beginnings of the world or some heavenly destination. But lately, I've come to wonder what it would be like to recognize paradise in my local environment. What if this eternal concept of paradise were to present itself as something very close by? I see paradise depicted in Persian miniatures, Indian miniatures, all across times, all across the world. But what would it look like if it came very close to me, to what I know? And can I recognize paradise in that sense? It led me to explore local materials, sustainable and eco-friendly materials that reinforce the message of paradise about life, harmony, and purity. So from that point of view, I started looking at my local environment, which is in Northern Europe, the Netherlands to be specific, with different eyes. I recognized, after reading a book by Daniel Thompson about medieval materials and techniques, that medieval craftsmen and artists would use local materials very often because they didn't necessarily distinguish between something like gum arabic, which is a binder for watercolor, but which comes from an acacia tree that doesn't grow there locally. And then they would, for example, use local materials like cherry gum or plum sap from a plum tree or sap from an apricot tree, and then they would use that as a local binder. So it made me look to my local environment for sourcing my materials. And this past year and a half, I've been exploring how to make a binder that is local. And yeah, it's led me to approach my art and my artistic practice in a completely new and renewed way. I formulated a binder using cherry gum, using honey, because honey for me has a very paradisical essence to it. And I use a lot of rose water in my work as well, because I'm very fond of roses, most particularly historic roses and English roses. So I have many David Austin roses in my backyard, and I just love the smell of roses. So I've been using that and formulating a binder recipe with that. That for me qualifies as something that is paradisical and that adds to this world and also reinforces the message of my art. So as an artist and gardener, I am very fond of my own garden, and I'm trying to use as many materials from my own garden as I can in my art. And this is an ongoing exploration in my research as well. I love using fruit woods from my garden, which I gather when it's time for pruning. And then I will turn them into charcoal. For example, when we do like a fire in the backyard. So this is from the grapevine in my garden. And using a mortar and pestle and like the safety precautions that you do when working with pigments, you can turn that into a fine powder of pigment. Pigment is nothing other than very fine particles that are non-water soluble. And then what binds the pigment to, for example, paper or a canvas is what we call a binder. And a binder can be egg yolks in the form of egg tempera paint. It can be gum arabic for traditional watercolor paint. It can be oil if you're talking about oil paint. And that binder is like a glue that basically keeps the pigment particles together. So I'm using my own formulation of a cherry gum binder, a local paradisical binder, if you ask me, together with materials, and in this case the grape wood charcoal, which I turned into pigment, and then you mull it with a muller. That's how traditionally pigments or paints were made. It basically grinds the pigment finer and finer until you are left with a very fine paint. In this case, a watercolor paint, because I use a binder with cherry gum and it's water soluble. I do some testing after I'm done mulling, because you want your pigment particles to be completely bound, so that when you go over it, for example with a little towel, that it doesn't come off, so it doesn't rub off. So I do many tests for my research in order to also know which ratios go with which pigments, and to be able to compare and look back. And it's my hope that at the end of my research, I'll be able to also help other artists in their paint making journeys by giving a little handbook of the ratios that I found. So here I am with a collection of my pigments and some of my artworks. This, for example, concludes my second year of research. During my first year, I transitioned to using more local materials for my art, trying to make more circular art, or working towards circular art that is non-toxic, that the earth can basically sustain. Here are some of my materials that I use in my practice. These are a variety of fruit woods from my garden that I turned into charcoal. So for example, for my cherry tree miniature, which is a copy from the Trudescent Orchard manuscript from the Bodleian Libraries, I used cherry wood black, for example, for outlining and for all the shading. So I'm trying to incorporate the subject into the choice for materials, to not only tell the story about my subject, but also to let it tell the story with me, basically.